Hello everyone, and welcome to Murder in Stratton County, written by Elizabeth Spoon and Ryland Mason, narrated by me, Brian Shepard. Chapter 4, Part 1, When It Rains, It Pours. Meanwhile, Deputy Marks was just pulling up to the road leading to the trailer park outside of town. It was eerily silent, and a fog had started to spread slowly across the property as the temperature rose. A deer jolted across the back field, spooked by his approaching cruiser. The property was owned by Duchess and her late husband. They used it as a rental property for campers and hikers. Most of the trailers were closed up for the winter. Summer rentals long since packed up for the season. Deputy Marks pulled up to a row of mailboxes at the end of the drive. One was still labeled. Prudence Wainwright was the name on the box. Wow, what a name. He made a note in his log of his arrival time and the maid's name and actual address, then proceeded to drive to find the trailer that matched the number on the box, number 8. He crept slowly along the row until he came to it. He stopped, putting the car in park, and stepped out, looking around. This place is creepy, he said to himself. It was like a ghost town. The door to the trailer was wide open, and the maid's red Honda Civic was parked in a makeshift driveway. Marks unclipped his sidearm and hollered out for the maid. "Miss Wainwright, are you home? Hello? This is Deputy Marks. I need to speak with you. Hello?" There was nothing. He slowly approached the doorway to the trailer when two doves came booking out of the door. He pulled his gun, startled by them, and fell back over a stone that was a marker for the driveway, crashing to the ground and flailing like a turtle for a minute. What the frick? God darn birds. He stood up, holstering his weapon, thankful no one was around to see his fumble, and that he had not discharged his firearm. He then proceeded to look inside the trailer. Inside, it looked as if the place had been ransacked. Everything was in a disarray. Kitchen chairs were tossed, there was broken glass everywhere, and clothes strewn all over the place. Marks took a step back, deciding that stepping inside was not a good idea. As he looked at the floor and ground right outside the trailer, he saw some blood trails, immediately alerting him that something had definitely happened here. He ran to the cruiser, grabbed at his radio for dispatch. "Dispatch! Dispatch! Come in!" Marks was frantically yelling into his radio. There was radio silence. Oh man, this isn't good. All while trying to raise dispatch, he jumped in and threw it in reverse, heading back to town to get the sheriff. Down at Town Hall, the meeting was already in session with Brian, Dugan, and Chief Hudson. They had all met in the lobby. "The room is ready, sir," Debbie said. "Thanks, Debbie." Brian's secretary had already put a pitcher of water and a small platter of cut fruit, cheese, and crackers on the table. They all took a seat as the secretary closed the door. As she shut the door, she could see Diego coming up the stairs. "Well, I'm afraid to tell you, Mr. Mayor, but the fire was definitely arson." "Arson? What? But why? Who?" Brian said, confused. "Someone accessed your kitchen through an open sliding door and blew out the pilot light on your stove. Then proceeded to stuff the hand towels and accelerant, most likely kerosene, into the stove, lighting it on fire in hopes that the gas would explode. For whatever reason, it didn't," Hudson said. "I don't understand." Brian put his head in his hands and looked down at the table. "Are you absolutely sure it was arson?" Dugan looked at Bill. "My boys are pretty thorough. It was definitely arson," Hudson said, pretty much confirming it. The room was quiet for a minute. Brian reached for the pitcher on the table and poured himself some water, his hands shaking a little at the realization someone had tried to kill him. Snuff him. Burn him to death in his own home. "This doesn't make any sense to me. Do you have any enemies?" Hudson asked Brian, now looking just as confused and shocked as Brian. "No, no one that I can think of," Brian said, trying to think. Just then, the deputy came flying through the door. Sheriff, I tried to raise you through dispatch, he said, clearly shaken and out of breath. What? What is it, Marks? The sheriff asked. The maid, sir. She's... Spit it out, Marks. She's missing. Her trailer has been trashed, and there's blood. Oh, my God. Brian stood up. Someone tried to kill me, and now my maid, Prudence, is missing. What the hell is going on? Brian said, now pacing. Calm down. We'll get to the bottom of this, Dugan said, looking at Brian. Marks, get out to the Wainwright place and tape it off. I gotta make some calls, Dugan said as he pulled his pants up, sticking his finger in his pant loops, like always, and made a beeline for the door, grabbing Deputy Marks by the sleeve as he went. Brian stood looking down at Stratton from the window of the conference room. Chief Bill Hudson stood up from the table and slipped the folder with the fire and damage report into his hand, grabbing his coat and flinging it over his shoulder with the other hand. Well, Brian, I'm sorry, old friend. No, I'm sure there's an explanation. Bill could see the stress in his face. I'm going to see if Dugan needs any help, Bill said as he made his way out of the room. He turned and quickly went down the corridor to the stairs leading out to the first floor in the lobby. The secretary, silent in her notation of the meeting and having her own thoughts on the matter, slowly got up, taking her notepad and a copy of the arson report, quickly scurried out of the room to make copies and type her notation for record. Brian turned and walked back to the table, putting his arms out and his hands flat on the table as he just closed his eyes for a minute to think. His secretary tapped on the door. Sir, I made copies for your records. Thank you so much. Brian stood up and went to the window again. Can you call down to the market and put an order in for some groceries, Debbie? Oh, yes. Anything in particular you need? Just the basics, he said without any emotion. Okay, sir. No problem. That young man from the paper is waiting outside to speak with you. Brian turned and walked towards the door, his secretary disappearing down the hall. Diego stood up as Brian stood in the doorway of the conference room. Do you have a minute, sir? Well, Brian thought for a minute. He couldn't release really too much information, knowing that Prudence was missing, and that there had been an attempt on his life. How about you talk to my secretary and set up an appointment? Okay. Diego turned to quickly find the secretary, thanking Brian. Brian definitely needed more information before he made anything else public knowledge. His attempted killer could be reading it. He closed the conference room door and sat at the end of the table. He picked up the phone to a direct line to the secretary's desk, and of course, she answered right away. Yes, sir. Debbie, give him 2 o'clock, okay? Yes, no problem. Brian hung up the phone, sitting back in this chair as he mulled over all the questions. What was really going on? What happened to his maid? Who was holding a grudge? Who had an axe to grind? So many questions. He sank back in the chair, his hand on his head. Maybe he would know more in a couple of hours. Sheriff Ratchet headed for his cruiser. Marks, get out there and tape it off. I'm going to stop at the station and make a call to old lady Whitman, since she owns the property, and put a call in to a detective, a friend upstate. I think we may need some help. Yes, sir, Sheriff. I'm on it. Deputy Marks jumped into his cruiser and headed back out to the trailer park. At the station, Dugan searched the Rolodex on his desk. He phoned the chief of the state police. They spoke briefly, Dugan filling him in on the recent events. He agreed to immediately send a couple of troopers to assist the deputy. He then, finding Mrs. Whitman's number, dialed it. The phone rang a couple of times before she answered. Hello? Her scratchy voice on the other end. He could hear Mopsy barking in the background. Quiet! She yelled. Yes, hello. Morning, Miss Whitman. This is Sheriff Ratchet. How are you? Well, now, how are you, Sheriff? What can I do for you? Well, there's been an incident out at the trailer park. An incident? What kind of incident? She coughed a little. He could hear her dragging on her cigarette. We aren't quite sure yet. I needed to contact you, though, because you're the property owner. I can stop and talk to you in person when I head out there. That would be fine, Sheriff. See you then. Since her husband had passed, she didn't drive the car, which was parked in the garage with a tarp over it. Okay, I will be there shortly. He hung up the phone. Flipping through the Rolodex again, he searched for a friend's number. Dennis Malloy. Private investigator, Esquire. He dialed the number. The phone rang several times before an answering machine picked up. This is Detective Malloy. Please leave a message and I'll return your call as soon as possible. Hi, Dennis. I know it's been a long time, but this is Dugan down here in Stratton. I've got a situation I need some help on. Get back to me soon, please. Dugan left his number, then grabbed his keys and headed off to see Miss Whitman and get out to the trailer park. Pulling it up front of the house, old Lady Whitman was sitting on the porch in her chair. Dugan looked at the clock in the car. It was already 11. Better make this quick, he said to himself, getting out of the car and pulling up his pants again. Hello, Sheriff. He walked up to the stairs. Maybe we should speak inside. Miss Whitman got up and opened the screen door to the house. Please, come in. So what's this all about? He looked around. Surprisingly, the house was spotless. I can't tell you much at this point, but I do need your permission to access the property out there where the trailers are. Were you renting to a Prudence Wainwright? Yes, I was. She was the only one. All the others left for the season. She says she was working for the mayor. Nice girl, pretty. Has something happened to her? I don't know. The sheriff looked down at the floor for a minute. I just don't know yet, Duchess. Looking back at her. Well, do what you have to. You have my permission. I don't go out to many places now that Henry passed on. She always stopped here to pay her rent, or slipped it into the mailbox for me. Before I go, can you tell me anything about her? Maybe a boyfriend? No, not really. She was a quiet girl. She paid on time. That's all I can really say. Okay, thanks, Duchess. That'll be all for now. Keep me posted, if you can, about what's going on, she said. Sure thing. Dugan exited the house and got back into his cruiser. Duchess watching him from the porch as he pulled away and headed out of town towards the trailer park. I'm going to stop there, folks. Part 1, Chapter 4. Look for Part 2 coming soon. Give me some time, and you'll hear it then. All right, everyone, thank you so much for listening.